Hello everyone and welcome to the second video in my series on UK tropical garden basics. Today it's all about the design. I was going to do a video on hardiness, but I've decided that while my garden's at a stage where you can see the basic structure, that it'll be a good time to go through how I've got it to this stage and any tips and tricks I'd use to give more impact and structure to a tropical garden. Now I do understand that every garden is different and every location is different, and even within tropical gardening there can be a huge variety of different garden and planting styles. So today I just wanted to focus on 10 more general planting tips rather than hard landscaping, just to help you create your summer garden this year. Kicking things off then with my first tip, that is consider the eventual or mature size of any plants you put into your garden. Now, I know it's easily overlooked when you buy a load of new plants, you want to get them in the ground quickly and get a border that looks great from the day you plant it. But eventual size has a huge impact on how your garden will look over time, and you might find, especially with tropical gardening, a lot of palms like Trachycarpus fortunei, trees like eucalyptus, they do grow very quickly. So a plant that you might just put in at a small size, maybe 2-3 feet, a metre tall, that could soon be 4 or 5 metres tall over just a few years, maybe 10 years, and that can completely change the feel of the space. So it's really important, look at the plant, and rather than planting them just as short-term foliage interest without looking at the bigger picture, plan ahead, put your bigger plant at the back of borders or where you've got plenty of room for that vertical space. Following on from that then, my second tip is, don't be afraid of planting large plants in small spaces. It can be tempting if you've got a small garden to just focus on the smaller size plants, but with these tropical exotic plants that have massive impact already, you can really amplify that by choosing a large plant, maybe one feature plant. For example, if you have a courtyard or a small shady area, one large tree fern can immediately set that exotic tone for the garden. So it's well worth not ruling out these large plants, maybe choose one or two of your absolute favourite feature plants and style the rest of the garden around them. It will certainly have a lot more impact that way. Another great tip to help this impact is simply, if you're building any borders around your lawns or patios, make them wider. What you tend to find is that borders may be less than around a metre, it's hard to create that depth, that exotic jungle look, whereas if you make them 1.5 metres or ideally even wider than that, you can really create layered planting with tall plants, small plants, and build up that depth to really help that exotic vibe. One comment I see in a lot of the groups about tropical gardening, especially from beginners, is that a tropical garden can look bare in the winter. And whilst it can be true, I think equally the same can be said for any kind of garden without a lot of evergreens. So the best way of tackling this, for me personally, is prioritise the view. It might be outside your kitchen window, it might be a front garden, or it might just be where you walk out into your garden in winter. And prioritise evergreens around that particular view. So focus on the plants like Trachycarpus, phormiums, anything really colourful. If you focus on them in that area, it will create that impact when you first walk into the garden all year round. Following on from that tip, and this is more of a practical, personal sort of tip than anything I've read anywhere else, but I find it really helpful to group plants together in terms of the care they need through the year. By that I mean, if you've got a shady area, obviously the overriding principle for any kind of gardening is the right plant in the right place, but group plants like tree ferns, if you're lucky enough to have multiple tree ferns, group them together because you know they need that regular watering throughout the year, they like somewhere damp, and it's easier just to water the whole area than it is to dot them around your garden. You might have less impact that way. Likewise, if you've got plants like agaves, succulents, some of the palms that might need better drainage, there's no point planting them right next to tree ferns. Especially in winter, if you're watering your tree ferns most weeks while it's still mild, you don't want to be spraying that water all over the heads of, say, Yucca rostratas, which like to be as dry as possible in winter, and too much water will lead to rotting. So I personally find it's worth planning ahead, thinking about roughly what sort of care different areas need, and planting towards that. So you can eventually maybe have a dry area and a more woodland area. I think this not only helps in a practical way, but also the plants just look better together and it just seems more natural. My next important tip then, and this is a priority whether you're designing or actually planting your garden, and that's focus on the structural plants first. And by that I mean the evergreens, trachycarpus palms, bamboos, plants that give a lot of height, presence to the garden, generally the evergreens that are there all year round. You want to prioritise those, put them in first, especially if you're planting your garden in summertime. You might find if you focus on a lot of the tropical plants like cannas, when it comes to winter, you're going to end up with huge gaps in your garden, and you might wish you'd juggle things around just a little bit differently. Prioritise these evergreens, the plants you're going to see all year, focus on those and build the rest of the garden around them. I think one of the key aspects of any kind of garden design is the idea of simplicity, repetition, and keeping sort of common forms, colours consistent throughout the garden space. And this is where there's a bit of a clash with tropical or exotic gardening, because a lot of people who are interested in exotic gardening like the plants themselves, and it's very easy to have more of a collection than a consistent and coherent garden. I know personally this is my sort of trap. Just because I enjoy growing so many kinds of plants doesn't always mean that visually they work together. But, for me that's one of the compromises of the whole exotic gardening thing. And if I was wanting to create an exotic garden that had more visual impact, one of my top tips would be focus on less varieties and have more of them. I think one of the practical ways you can work this into sort of any garden for this year is just when it comes to your summer bedding plants or the annuals, just focus on a few varieties of, say, cannas, ricinus, and use those consistently dotted through the garden. I think it works well with dahlias as well. You might find that just by using a few varieties, or maybe even one or two of your favourites, use those consistently, and it creates a more coherent and well-designed space than it does growing every kind of variety that you want to grow. For a lot of people, one of the most exciting aspects of exotic gardening, especially here in the UK, is growing plants that definitely look like they belong in another climate, rare plants, plants that need that extra bit of protection to be able to survive here. But one of my pieces of advice for beginners would be choose plants that are proven, tried and tested. You can still get exotic looking plants like Trachycarpus or the Phormiums, Cordylines. I think for a beginner especially, until you know the different care requirements and the probabilities of that plants will actually thrive where you live, it's worth focusing on the basics. You're better off having a garden that's full of healthy plants, full of life, that look green after winter, than it is having a garden full of struggling plants that get set back with every bad winter and might take years to recover, plants that just aren't suitable for your area. So my advice would be, start off with the basics first, build up that hardy backbone, and you'll get a great looking garden from day one that you can slowly expand, add in the more rare and unusual specimens as your skill level and knowledge increases. Now, I don't mean that to sound patronising, it's just you see a lot of gardens with plants that aren't doing very well, big palms, you can spend a lot of money on them, and if you have a bad couple of winters, they just go brown, they're going to take a long time to grow back. Here in the UK, we just don't have the summer heat to get palms bouncing back quickly, and you might regret that purchase. So focus on the basics first, and then build up the rarer plants later on, just don't make them an integral part of your planting design. My next tip is don't forget the verticals. I think with tropical gardening, it's very easy to get carried away with interest in certain types of plants or groups of plants. Plant mini garden, you might add bedding plants to these, and before you know it, you've got a selection of smaller, lower height plants, and you don't have that interest. I think as a group of plants, bamboos and grasses are great for this. Certainly palms like Trachycarpus are. I think you need to work the verticals into your long-term planting scheme, and they're a great way of transforming the feel of a garden. So this is one way in our new garden that I've tried to enclose the middle sort of jungle clearing area with taller bamboos, and I use them to funnel the next walkway before the garden then opens out again. So although they're just plants like any others, they definitely create more structure, and they create a sort of feel into the space that you wouldn't get just by growing smaller plants. My last tip for today then is simply work with what you've got. Now in previous videos I have looked at ways of, say, amending the soil, for example adding organic matter to increase moisture retention in sandy soils, building raised beds for feather palms, using grit for drainage. But ultimately, you need to look at the factors like light, moisture, and see how these affect the planting you're wanting to put in. There's no point battling against this, and the age-old right plant in the right place really is crucial. If you've got a courtyard garden, say, that's shaded for most of the year, there's no point growing plants that require a lot of sunlight to really grow effectively. And equally, if you've got a very exposed coastal garden with dry sandy soil, even with all the care you can give a tree firm, it's never going to thrive and it's never going to look as impressive as those in a more suitable location. So just look at the basic factors first. I'm not saying you can't try plants that potentially shouldn't grow there, but in general, you'll have a lot easier life and the plants will look healthier if you choose plants that are more suited to where you garden. And this doesn't just have to be your garden in a whole. You can maybe look at shady areas in your garden, use those for more woodland style exotic planting. And where you've got the sunny areas, or areas that are naturally banked up, use those for the succulents, the yuccas, the agaves, and you'll find they're happier there. It's all about finding the right place for the right plant and not trying to grow things that are going to struggle no matter how much care and love you give them. Hopefully you found this video interesting and helpful, and if you are planning to use one or two of these tips in your garden this year, please let me know in the comments below, it'd be great to hear it. I think with tropical gardening, more than any other kind of gardening, you've got to go for it. It rewards people who commit 100%, and I think these plants grow so fast and have so much impact as they are, that when a design works, it really works well. And equally, if it doesn't work how you want to, a lot of these tropical summer plants can be completely moved around and you can have a completely different garden again next year, so there's nothing lost. I think you have to remember that a lot of these plants, they're quite new to cultivation here in the UK. You might find that something grows well in places where it shouldn't, so even a lot of my rules don't need to be followed. But I think the main thing is, have fun, learn about your plants you're growing, and put something together that makes you happy. See you soon!